I've done that. I probably still do that. I will probably do that again, because I think it's our nature that when you have an idea about a thing, that sometimes when you see something you don't like, it's hard. Your flesh wants to react to it, right? Your flesh wants to smack out at it, attack it. But you guys know this isn't anything new. This has been a whole attitude change, perspective change for me personally over the course of years, to realize that's not what should define us. Our conservative values are not what should define us. What did Jesus, and this isn't even part of the lesson, right? This question I'm asking right now, but what did Jesus say should define us? Love. Love. Yeah. We ought to be characterized by love, not by the fact that we're pursuing conservative values and we want conservative values in our community and we want conservative values on the national political level or worldwide. It's that we really show love to believers. That ought to be the thing. And that's hard, especially if you've been raised. My family wasn't super political, but my dad taught political science. My dad taught history. My dad taught government. And so I can guarantee you, we got a blast of it once in a while. My dad would sit there. I mean, I grew up every morning. My dad's sitting at the breakfast table and we're eating breakfast. And every morning he's got the newspaper. Of course, the first thing he reads is the Big Peach, which was the Des Moines Register sports section. He's looking at that before he looks at anything else. And then he goes and reads other stuff, political stuff, government stuff. And I'd listen to him say things like that. So you're raised kind of to sometimes react to things. Jim's talked about, his dad, the way his upbringing, his dad's political values, and you really want your kids to adopt those things. And a lot of us end up adopting them, not realizing that shouldn't be our pursuit. We really ought to be defined by something else. I almost sometimes think as Christians, we ought to almost become apolitical. And people go, well, then you're just asking for government to roll over you. You know what? Biblically, I have no say really in what happens in government. I don't care what you tell me. The Bible says God's the one that's in control of it. Satan's behind that. And I have no control except for how I react. It's the only thing I can control. I do not control who's in the White House. I do not control who's in the Senate. I don't control not any of that. Anyway, and you may disagree with me firmly, but I can't read the Bible any other way. Okay. So if there's one thing that maybe we encourage, because this is for the young people, if there's one thing maybe we encourage you young people with, is that is you go out into the world to focus on what matters. And what really matters is loving people, especially really loving believers. That's what you're there to do. That ought to be the thing that you're focused on. And being, think even towards the world, then being a person that treats them well, even if they don't deserve to be treated well, because God treats us well and we don't deserve to be treated well. Anyway, okay. So let's go to James chapter 3, because where we left off last week, not James 3, James chapter 1. James 3 we saw, and when we get there, when we get to James, and this is one of those verses that was a game changer for me to really think about this. But we'll start down here with Carmen. If you would read James chapter 1 and verse, let's go to verse 26 and 27. Read both of those verses for us, please.
If anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world.
Does anybody have a definition for what religion is? How would you define religion?
Set of rules based on a philosophy.
Okay.
It's a belief system.
Okay.
I was thinking a belief system based on something higher than yourself. Because most of that sounds good about.
Yeah.
Might even add that it's what somebody bases their lifestyle on.
Okay.
Basis of the practice.
Now, if we can take all of those and put them all together, you really have a definition of the Greek word that's translated religion. The Greek word that's translated religion, Carmen started off with a set of rules. That the Greek word actually referred to the duties, which you say that's kind of like rules, the duties that a person does in serving their God. When serving their God, that means there's a certain way they think about that God. And that then defines them. So they've got a certain set of duties that they think I have to do these things to serve my God. This is really the background, but this is what the Greek word referred to. Now look at our two verses here. The first part of verse 20 or verse 26, what does it say that people sometimes, and he's talking to believing Jews now. They're believers like us. They just don't know everything. I think the people he's writing to, I don't think they know everything we know because they don't have the rest of the New Testament. And they haven't really heard a lot of what Paul teaches. But what does he say that these people, what's their problem? Their tongue. But they think that they are religious. They think that they're serving God. They think they're keeping the duties that God's given them. But as they do those things, they don't see a conflict. They don't have a problem with their tongue. Just, well, what might a person do with their tongue?
Say mean things.
Say mean things. And in the context, we ended last week with that in James 3, that you insult your brother, a person, and he says that person was made, stands made. In the Greek, stands made, meaning it's still a result. Even fallen man in this corrupt fallen state that we're in, we still bear something of the likeness of God. Okay. Right? Remember that from last week? So when you insult or say something harsh, what you're really doing is you're criticizing an aspect of that person. Well, think about this. I mean, sometimes, when you're kids, I never had glasses when I was a kid. I had one really good friend. He was probably just about my best friend growing up. He's the only kid I think I can remember in my class that wore glasses. If there was anybody else, I don't remember, except for some girls, but no boys. I still remember when he first walked into school with glasses the first time. This would be bullying. You get sent to the principal's office these days. But back then, this is par for the course. What did they say? Four-eyed. Yeah, I still remember. I don't remember saying that because I didn't know what that meant. But apparently some of them, grew up in families where you did things like that. And there were people that, we had one kid that would come to school and he looked like literally he had just dragged himself out of bed and his hair would come and it'd be kind of just sticking up all over like he hadn't even wetted. My dad was the type that you didn't leave the house until you wet your hair down and combed it at the very least so that it was all neat. My dad was very particular about how we went out, especially to go to school. But I had friends because they did stuff like this. What did you do? You insulted them. You made fun of them. You did things like this. And so I think even though the school is trying to encourage kids not to bully, is it still the nature of people that when you have even could be even your best friend, when they do something different or do something that's odd or something that doesn't look right, do we still have a tendency to mock them and make fun of them? Tease? Okay. I think in this context, I think this is more serious than making fun of somebody's glasses or their hair or their clothes. The context here is you're making fun of people because, well, you still are just living hand to mouth, or there are days you go without eating because you don't have enough money. And it's just because you're a worthless, no good, lazy person. That's the conflict going on in the book of James. That's the conflict going on in the book of James. If you guys don't remember that, these people have lost almost everything. They are now scattered out into other places. They're coming into places where they are starting at the bottom of the bottom of the ladder, starting over, digging ditches, shall we say. I don't know that ditch digging would be the lowest job, but you know what I'm saying. Down their job that everybody's going, I'm glad I don't have to do that job. Everybody follows? And so as these people are trying to reclaim this status, it's real easy for them to look down at these people out there, that these believers that are still struggling. This is one believer against another believer, keep in mind. and to be mean towards them. Okay. So then what does he say in verse 27? What should be true? Clean religion and religion that's not defiled. And you're not mixing it up with a bunch of other garbage. What does he say about it?
Look after orphans and widows
Okay.
and keep oneself unstained.
Yeah. I grew up with the visit orphans and widows. So people thought if you went by and knocked on their door and visited, that's not what that word that's translated visit is the same word for what a bishop is. It's episkopos. It's a person that oversees. So they're looking to going, do you have what you need? Are you okay? Are you got enough food? You got enough? The weather's changing. You have the right clothes? This is what they were doing. In the early church they did this out the gate. And it's what they should have done. In fact, God even required that under the law for Israel. But now, here's the church is getting started. They practice that, and there was nothing wrong with that. But how does that help you get back what you've lost? Let's say you were making, I was telling Ben this the other day, I had somebody that I kind of know who this person is, but I don't know this, I've only visited this person a couple times briefly, but this person told another friend of mine, if you live on the Royal Slope and you don't make, I think what he told this person was $90,000 a year, you can't afford to live here. He says, you can't afford to live here. You can't afford to own a house and really get the stuff and do the stuff that you should be doing. This is the way this person took this. That's what this individual said. Anyway, but so I'm using that we'll use that as a gauge. If you're trying to get to that because you heard, because let's say that really is true. Let's say you're just struggling. You can barely feed your family. You can barely pay your bills and all of that. And so you're setting this as a goal. Every time there's a widow that has a need and you have to reach into your pocket to help her out, or an orphan, and you have to reach into your pocket and help that orphan out, it sets you back in your mental bookkeeping. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, but mentally, isn't you're going, boy, how am I going to get ahead if I keep being the nice guy helping these people out? Y'all get that? Does that make sense? I think this is why he has to bring this up, because apparently this is something that's being neglected. They're trying to be religious outwardly, but when it comes to actually taking care of the people that they really should be taking care of. And keep in mind, this is James, but remember in one of Paul's last letters, he says in 1 Timothy 5, he spends a long section in there talking about the importance of the church still caring for widows. And he says, widows indeed, meaning kids. I'll hear this. I tell my daughters this regularly. If statistics mean anything, I'm probably going to go before my wife does. And I've tried to set something aside to help take care of her, but it won't last long with the way the world is. And I always tell my girls, you're responsible for, and they both say, we will watch after mom. We will take care of her. And the reason for that, because he says in 1 Timothy 5, widows indeed, meaning they have nobody to take care of them. And what he means by that, it's not just that they don't have a husband or a wife, they're kids. They don't even have kids or near relatives to take care of them. He says that. That's what you're supposed to do. So your kids remember that. If your mothers ever find themselves destitute later on in life, that's your responsibility to look out for them. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of people that read this orphans and widows and think they need to go out into the world and have a ministry with them and all that. But this is talking specifically to believers, right? To
Right.
live in the church.
Right. And the best way to demonstrate that? Well, on the other, what you were saying, yeah. But the best way to demonstrate is to go to 1 Timothy 5. And he says over there's qualifications for taking care of a widow on the church roll. I mean, you could take care of them, but the church providing for them, they have to have a testimony. And he goes through and lists the kind of testimony that widow has to have for the church to be responsible for, because he says for putting her on the roll. They actually had a list of widows that they kept written down.
That's kind of hinting at that, would keep oneself unstained by the world.
There you go. Thank you. Right. Even here. Yeah. So you're not getting mixed up with the world, and the world is always, yes. Okay. Now, the reason we're coming over there is because our lesson is on religion. Religion hinders morality, but James tells us religion actually looks out for probably the most wanting, destitute part of the population, orphans and widows. I've told you this before. In their culture, a widow could go out and get a job, but I can guarantee she's out picking figs in an orchard. The person that hires her, they didn't have any laws that said you have to pay everybody equally. He's going to pay her a quarter. And she goes, I picked as much as the guys. And he didn't care. They get a denarius, you get a quarter denarius. This is the way it is. You don't have to like that today, but that's the way it was. So the thing was, even if she was able to go out and get a job, even if she was able to go out and get a job, it was, that's gonna be a problem. So the question then, in answer to this is that moral or immoral? No. Taking care of widows. I'm sorry. Going back to the main question. I'm so far off the question. We've illustrated so much. The question was, what did James tell us that genuine religion should do? Care for widows and orphans. That's what real religion should do. Real religion from God's point of view is not about the fact that you go through motions and observance and say certain prayers and bowing and all the different things and add the pinch of it. God doesn't care about that. What God cares about is that you really care for people the way you're supposed to. Even under the nation of Israel, God cared about that. God, you might sometimes think under the law God didn't care, but it is so plain when you read the law. God cared about how people treated each other within their nation. He was even cared about how they treated the strangers that came through their land. So that's moral. Okay. So we have another question. We got 3 verses we want to look at. While religion is about duty to God, how does Jesus describe you and I? Okay. So, and you might say, well, okay, what does this have to do with the whole religion thing? So let's go to John 15. You got a Bible there, Cale? John chapter 15 and verse 15. If you would read John 15:15 with your nicest, loudest voice, please. Let's go back to verse 14.
Next question.
Yes.
Verses we read 26 and 27. Tight rein on their tongues. And then, 27, the 2 things, look after orphans and widows and keep oneself from being polluted by the world. I guess it's easy to read that, but I don't know how well I do at that, or we do. I'm not looking, I'm honest, after any widows right now or orphans. And the whole thing about being polluted by the world, I can take that in a very broad spectrum. Maybe it's more microscopic in this verse, but look at, what are youth being polluted by? What are college age? What are young adults? What are adults? A lot of them are the same, There's a lot of attractions in the world, whether it be whatever it be, drugs, sexual. I mean, there's a million, right? And those are just things we say, hey, those are not even more probably attitudes, right? So I don't know. We read these, but we gloss over. What is our response to this? I know this is James speaking, so I imagine it's to the church. It's not some of the things maybe just to Jews to consider. What's our response to be? What am I to do? Yes.
Well, I think Ben's comment was very helpful. This is really James is really talking about how you take care of believers.
Right.
And we don't have this a ton in our churches today. And a lot of people put money away for retirement. So like, if my dad passed away right now, my mom would live reasonably comfortably the rest of her life. Because my dad was careful about putting some money aside, and then had a retirement plan and all that kind of stuff. So that type of situation is maybe a little bit different, but James and Paul in 1 Timothy 5 are talking about, you had a lot of widows though that weren't in those kind of situations. And I think that that's still true today. Like I said, if I passed away right now, I mean, I've got something put away from my wife, but it's not going to last long. It's expensive to live in the world, you know? And if she had to go out and move and get another house, buy a house, or try to rent even an apartment, it would that money is just going, you know, just goes away really fast. So I think those are the type of situations that we really need to think about is, do we have people like that in our world today? I don't think we have a lot of orphans for us as believers to look after, because the government steps in and you have parents that are gone. The church doesn't step in and say, now we're going to take care of these kids.
Right.
The government comes in and says, well, we're going to find appropriate. I mean, Stan and Linda have a granddaughter that left behind a young son. And that was just one of the concerns that they have, is for, you know, who's going to take care of him. And they think that's taken care of and settled. It's going to stay within the family, which is, I think, the way it should be. But what if sometimes family isn't able to fully be able to take care of that? Does the church step up then and help family do that, make that possible? I mean, you guys have, when they're little, you know, it doesn't take as much to feed them. After a certain point, you know, the money's going out the door. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you do grow up. So I'm just saying there are things, but I would say when they're little, they eat less. But what's the thing you spend a lot of money on a lot of times because it goes fast? Clothes. Kids grow so fast that, you know, next thing you know, the pants you bought 6 months ago are now, you know, that short on them. So there are things to help out with. So I think that those are things we look at. And right now, our church doesn't face that we have any widows in the church that are financially in need. We don't have, to my knowledge, any orphans in the church that need care. But if we did, now those were those two things, but the early church didn't do it just for those. I mean, those were the two that he mentioned because those are the most destitute normally. But what if you have people in the church that they're working, and not because they've gone out and squandered their money, but just because, you know, Ben was talking to me about the cost of trying to, you know, rent a house these days and things like that. You know, and it's so ridiculous that sometimes people can be working a full-time job and maybe going out and getting a part-time job after that. I've known parents, I've known single moms that have worked 3 jobs to take care of their kids.
Yeah.
I don't know any now, but I have known them just because wages have come up. But as wages have gone up, what happens? Inflation goes up. And so the cost of everything goes up. And so they kind of have got caught. But I have known that to happen. When we were in Iowa City, Peg knew a gal that was in that type of situation. And so those things, if those are believers and they're within your church, what do? You help.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that answer. Actually, that makes it seem like our focus shouldn't be on necessarily. It could be, if that's where Lord leads you, but a widow from Senate or a widow from news, or it's what's around you. So if I were to pass, being a primary breadwinner in our house, the idea is that you folks would make sure Lindsay's doing okay.
Yeah.
And my kids are doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true religion. You know, it's like our buddy Aaron, who we would not necessarily agree with the title of his organization. He's kind of in it. Just follow Jesus. He's like, look at all the rules. You know, people say, I'm a Christian, I lead a worship band. That's awesome. And God, you know, use that. But just follow Jesus. Like, what's he want you to do? Hey, you guys gotta take care of Lindsay. Maybe costly. You may have to help with some groceries or whatever. But I think that's what honors God in the end.
Gary and Leslie aren't here to share this story. And some of you maybe heard this, but how old was your grandpa when his dad died? like 4 or 5, right? Very
My
young.
grandpa was 4 or 5, yeah.
It's just,
He got typhoid fever. And my grandpa came to the bathroom door and he said, get out of the house, do not come back. And they ended up burning the house down because typhoid fever was so bad. He had 12 brothers and sisters. And the town of Wilbur would bring 1 time a week a bag of groceries to help him out.
was it, yeah. And they did that until she remarried. I thought your mom said there was the church that they had a tie
I
to,
don't hear all-
but that they provided her groceries to help with that family every week. And they did that until she remarried and didn't need that. But it was like, I think they said like 13 years till she remarried or something, you know, so that it wasn't like this was 6 months or so. Yeah. Think about that. That's quite a ways back, but I think that's a proper thing to do. Let's ask the next part of the question that you asked, keeping yourself unspotted from the world. We've got all kinds of ideas what that means, but I really think in the context of James, if you go to James 4, making yourself a friend of the world means I got to have and do everything the world does. So therefore that means, well, I don't have enough money to do that. So I'm going to have to rob from what I would normally help this poor widow with so that I can get the nice thing I want. Tim wants an F-150 pickup. Well, I'm never going to get that thing if I help that poor widow out. So I'm going to take hers and apply that to my, you get the point. And that's really plain over there in James 4, that's the problem with the world, is that it's baiting us with all these things that it says you need to have, you need to have, you need to do, you need to, right? Isn't that what the world does? And the thing is, having and doing takes money. Well, some stuff does. You can put your shoes on and go for a walk, but you know what I'm saying. But there are a lot of things, I want to go skydiving. Well, you're going to have to pay someone to take you up and skydive with you. And it's not that those things of themselves are wrong, but the thing is, a lot of times we can make that the thing that defines our life. And now we've become stained and spotted by it because we let it tell us what we should be. And we don't then take care of these other people. And he used widows and orphans. But the book is beyond just widows and orphans. Sometimes it's just your brothers and sisters in Christ that are, like I said, they're working 2 and 3 jobs and they can't get ahead. They're stuck, barely surviving. And if you're doing a little bit better, and so like in James, he says, you don't play favorites. If a guy comes in and he's wearing a sporty, this is a Goodwill jacket. I'm wearing it today, not for style, but because it's cold. I'm chilly. That's number one reason. But you're just saying, if you came in and you're wearing a real nice suit, $1,200 suit or something like that, and you got rings on your finger, and you remember you have that in James 2. And then you get the guy that comes in with smelly clothes. You can tell that he works for a living and he's got one set of clothes. That's all he got. And he comes in, you say, you sit over here on the floor by my feet. You, however, we're going to give you this nice bed. Ben, give up your cushions. This guy needs 2 more cushions on his folding chair. Yeah, but he says that. He says, you're showing favoritism. That's not good. That's not good. But the thing was, why would you show favoritism to this guy? This guy can't help you with anything. If you want to get ahead in the world, you've got to kiss the ring of the man that's got the bling. I made that up. Maybe somebody said that. That I was like, well, whoa, that was kind of a weird thing to say. I'm sorry. I was just like, okay. I did not hear that somewhere. I'm sorry. It's embarrassing that I came up with something that crazy like that. Anyway, but you get the point, right? Okay. James is just taken on there's a lot of things about James that I did not appreciate for a long time. And I have greater appreciation for what it's all about and what it means for me in terms of how I serve. So, and I trust for you too. So John chapter 15. Thank you. Those were really good questions. John chapter 15. And Kale.
Do 14 and 15.
Verse 14 and 15, please.
You are my friend. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you my friends, for everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you.
So while religion is about duty, and when you think of duty, you usually think about what kind of a person?
It's like,
A slave, a slave. But what does Jesus say about us? He's talking to the disciples, and by extension, us. What does he refer to us as? Friends. Friends. Okay. We'll save comments on this for just a little bit. Turn to Hebrews chapter 2. When we get to Hebrews 2, Kenya, if you would read for us verses 9 through 11, please.
Okay. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might face death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes the people holy and those who are made holy are of the same faith. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters.
So what does Jesus call us? Brothers and sisters. Are we his brothers and sisters in the way that the Mormons say we're brothers and sisters of Christ? No. We are brothers and sisters because he, being God, came down and took on flesh like we have. Not because he was born from God and we were born from God. So we're just kids. We're just behind our big brother. He's advanced beyond us a little bit. Someday we'll catch up. No. He became flesh, but he calls us brothers. Got that? Okay. Brothers and sisters, as her Bible says. Ephesians chapter 5.
Would you please put your stuff away
And when
there?
we get there, Lindsay, if you would read verses 1 and 2, please.
Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God.
This is just a complete aside from this. I always like that fragrant offering and sacrifice, that smell to God. Granted, they burned incense, so they understood that idea. But I'm always like, is there any of you that ever smell somebody that slapped a steak on the grill that goes, oh, you're always like, where is that? Anyway, but he says, but that's the way your activity is. So here's the point of these three things. When we're talking about religion, looks at duty that a person is expected to perform. How does Jesus, we looked at two statements. How does Jesus look at us? First as friends, and then as
Brothers and sisters.
brothers and sisters. How does God look at us here in Ephesians 5, 1 and 2?
Children.
And what kind of children? Beloved children. Not children like, you kids, I'm about ready to put you out on the street corner and sell you to the first person that comes by. Any of you ever heard anybody make that kind of a crack, when your kids get a little bit on the ornery side? No, honestly, to be very serious, beloved children. So stop and think about this. When we started last week, and we kind of reviewed this a little bit today, when we think about religion, what are the first things that usually come to people's mind? Not what we saw in James 1, but what do they usually think about?
Rules.
They think about rules. Right? Several of you went through and talked about that idea about thinking about rules, all the duties, all the rituals that you have to go through. What would you say based on these things should be our driving motivation for what we do for people? Something from the fruit from the Spirit. Love's going to be one of those things, as he says right here in Ephesians chapter 5. But also the fact that we're a brother of Christ and we look out for other brothers and sisters. That we are friends. You know? So how do you treat a friend? You do something for a friend out of duty or because you really care about a friend? I hope you do it because you really care about a friend. I mean, this last year when a bunch of you helped with the roof over there, I don't think I had to guilt anybody into that. I didn't have to go, man, it's going to be so hard. I just wish somebody would help us. You have to do that. We just said we're going to do this. And people showed up as they were able and helped. And I'm just like, that was super, super encouraging to me. Just to see people say, I want to come and help if I'm able to. Okay. And I think that's the whole point then of this is, does religion hinder morality? I don't think religion hinders morality. If you have a twisted version of religion and you think it's God's job for you to go out there and be mean to people and try to enforce some sort of a God rule on everybody. I think I did this on Wednesday night Bible study, but there's this Calvary Chapel pastor in Southern California by the name of Mike Weiner, and I've been listening to him for a few years now. Really like his I usually watch him online. He has a podcast that he does with it too. Really like it. He question and answer in his Bible studies, and I don't see eye to eye with him on everything, but I really like most of what he does. But this last week he interviewed a theonomist. If you don't know what a theonomist is a person that believes God, Namas, law, theos, Namas, God law. He believes that here, he's going to start with the United States because he lives here, that we should start living by the law of God out of the Old Testament. We should enforce the law of God. We should make people, and Mike says, well, do you guys think you ought to keep the Sabbath? He goes, not Saturdays, but Sundays, because clearly God has transferred the Sabbath over to Sunday. That's a bunch of baloney, by the way. But this guy went on and on. And one of the things I really liked about it is this guy makes a lot of philosophical statements, and Mike was asking questions based on scripture, which I really appreciated. And it was a cordial thing. Mike wasn't like attacking him, but he's just trying to understand, this theonomist perspective. But there are people that would have Jewish religion and they would want it enforced on the United States. They would want this put into place. I remember reading a book on theonomy back before I moved here to Royal City. Those guys, I don't remember I think those guys also, because they're Reformed, believe that the Sabbath is now on Sunday. But if you don't keep Sabbath, you get jailed, according to them. You get jailed. Why? Because you're not keeping the law. And they said, and maybe stricter punishments, because what happened when people broke the law in the Old Testament? They stoned him. Yeah. The guy picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. What should we do with him? Let's put him in jail, keep him on night. Let's go ask God. God says he's supposed to stone him. They took him out and stoned him for picking up sticks on the Sabbath day so he could start a fire. So they weren't supposed to do this.
But then you're more like this.
Yeah. Well, that's really what it is. And Mike asked that question and pointed that out. And of course, he thinks, well, that doesn't count because Islam is an illegitimate religion and Judaism, basically the law of the Old Testament. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about that overall. I'm bringing that up because that's the idea that some Christians, even though we go, oh, I reject that idea, in practice, there's a lot of Christians that do think that way, don't they? That they kind of think that we really ought to be enforcing in the world some version of Christian law. And say Old Testament law, but usually it's that. I mean, do you ever run into that? Feel that sometimes this is the way some Christians think? And yet I think rather than us becoming religious and focusing on our duties and things like that, if we focus just on doing good, I didn't even include that in here, but doing good as you have opportunity, Galatians, loving believers as you have opportunity. I think that kind of disarms this whole thing because you are being moral from a certain person's perspective without trying to make it your focus about being moral. Okay. We could move on to the next lesson, but it's Does anybody have any comments or questions? We probably maybe discussed this to death last week, but I just want to know what everybody's thinking here.
How would you take that question? Verse 1, therefore, be imitators of God.
How would I take how you're an imitator of God?
Yeah, how would you take Paul's writing here? I mean, it elaborates on it, walk in love.
And I would say at the end of the verse, he says, "You're beloved children." Beloved by whom? By God. God's loved you. So you turn around and show that you imitate God by showing the same kind of love that he's shown you. But I think if you don't pay attention to the chapter division, that's artificial. Right at the end of last verse, in verse 43, it says, be kind to one another, compassionate, being gracious with yourself, even if God in Christ has been gracious with you. See, God's been gracious with you. And I've told you before, I think if you are gracious, that word that's translated forgive you, if you're gracious with yourself, I think that affects your ability to accomplish those first two things, to be kind and tenderhearted or compassionate. I think the number one reason that we are not kind and tenderhearted or not compassionate to others is because we're not gracious with ourselves. How many of you fail? How many of you ever get really frustrated with yourself because of the things you fail at? Don't raise your hand on this, but how many of you then have a tough time getting past that and you spend too much time beating yourself up for your failure? Even if nobody else sees it, you are mentally beating yourself up because, man, I really blew that.
Like that's satanic attack to discourage you.
It is. It is.
He doesn't let you forget, even though you forgot. He reminds you of that.
That's right. He's not gracious with you. Only God is. But when you learn to be gracious with yourself as God is, were you going to add something? Oh, when you do that, you find it a lot easier to handle other people and be kind and compassionate. In fact, that was part of the conversation yesterday. I know I probably don't exemplify this all the time. But when I came here, I thought I knew everything. I came here, I'm 27, I'm wet behind the ears. I think, man, I know the word of God. I'm going to help these people out. And God corrects my thinking along the way. It keeps doing that. But really over time, I found out people do, I think, appreciate when you handle the word well and you teach them stuff. But you know what they care about more? They care about more whether you care about them. And if you care about them, I think people then are more likely to actually listen and say, okay, it's not that he's telling us that we ought to love one another. He shows it. I don't know that I feel that as well as I should. But the other thing in verse 32 is that idea of kindness. It's one of those things that's really stuck in my mind that I want to be a person that treats people with kindness. I don't want to be that person that I don't want to be around him. He just rubs me the wrong way. He's always so high and mighty or whatever, or just opens his mouth and just spews all this knowledge. And I feel like, which I don't think I could do that, but, I could try to do that, and I have had times in the past where I've had people that have disagreed with me. And my flesh is so kicked into gear that I take the word of God. And the next thing you know, 20 minutes later, in my mind, I've made them that small. And I have gone inside. And then about that fast, you're like, you were a real jerk right then. You were a real jerk. You were a real jerk. You didn't need to handle that like that. But I have done that. And I think that there's really to just encourage you all. And I think this goes back to this whole idea of religion and morality. I think if we as Christians focused a little bit more on exhibiting kindness as Ben was saying that, part of the fruit from the Spirit. He was talking about, how do we accomplish these things? By exercising some of the fruit from the Spirit. You have the ability to be kind. So, anybody else has something to add? Okay. So just a heads up, we will move into number 9, which kind of goes hand in hand with this one, and that does religion cause or encourage violence? That's the next one we're going to be looking at. Does religion encourage violence? And if you think, what in the world is that about? Just wait until you look at some of the questions and scriptures that you got in there, and you'll see what people have. Then we've got the blank page that our brother Jim is handling. He's gonna take that one. And like I've told you, it took us 2 weeks to go through this last one, and it probably could have taken us faster, but Tim drew it out too long, probably. I don't know. But Jim might take a week or two or a little bit more on what is does science destroy Christianity? He's volunteered to step up and do that. And then number 11, Carmen volunteered to handle, does Christianity treat women poorly? I think maybe that's appropriate that we got a woman teaching on that. And then we've got what? Is Christianity homophobic? Does Christianity promote slavery? If God is real, why is there so much suffering? And can we really believe in hell? So we've got 4 lessons after that. If you look through these and you think, hey, I could get up and kind of do what Tim does up there. I could have people read these verses and I could let other people help answer the questions. And you don't have to sit and be like me and blather at the mouth as much as I do. But if you want to do one of those last 4, this is okay. And just keep offering. So, okay. Any final questions or comments? I appreciate you for participating, thinking through these things. It's an encouragement, I think, going through this to say, I don't want to be religious. I want to be known as a person that's loving and kind and compassionate. So let's have a word of prayer. Father, we're thankful for the morning. We're thankful for the things that your word tells us, that it actually provides us correctives to some of the ideas that we and culture around us can develop. And we ask that we wouldn't just learn these things as a matter of fact, but even as James says, that we might be those that are not just hearers, but are doers, and that we might allow ourselves to be defined by the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives and not just some external set of rules. Thank you for these things. Again, reminded that ultimately for us, religion is a set of duties, but Christianity is a relationship with you. And we're thankful for that relationship.